Hello and welcome back to the CogX 2021 Festival virtual booth / Fringe Festival stage that is Neon Juno and our booth. And throughout the event, we've been inviting our friends to come along and have conversations. The theme for us as a business and for the booth this few days is around exponential leadership and how you can prepare leaders, teams, businesses to cope with the uncertainty and the pace of change that's happening right now. And I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Chris Phippen to the stage. Chris runs a business called Hatless Studios here in Devon, and I have been following his work and we've been having some bizarre conversations. So I think you guys are in for a treat over the next 20 minutes or so, in terms of what skills are needed now and in the future for leaders and for emerging leaders. So how do we start disrupting education, both in terms of formal education in schools and colleges, and also ongoing continuous professional development to help humans to thrive in this exponential age. So Chris, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
So tell us, or tell the audience a bit more about who you are and what you do.
So hello, I'm Chris. So I'm the founder of a company called Hatless Studios. In essence, we bring young talent, mostly people at universities in the Southwest, and we train them up in software development or marketing skills, mobile development, etc., etc. And we get them working on real world projects as soon as, basically. Most of the work I've done since graduating, as I hope is visible, I am still a young human, has been with people my age or similar. And we've just got messages in chat, which I would imagine is from Louis. There you go. Hello, Louis. Welcome to the Fireside Chat. Yeah, so I've been working with young people, kind of teaching them the ways of the world, mostly in business or technology, and really trying to break down some of the kind of the mythology that exists around business and education at the moment. And I see Claire's face as I say mythology.
Mythology? Now that's very interesting. Well, come on, expand on that phrase.
Well, so I think one of the biggest, I say mythology because there is very much this myth, I think, of understanding and of certainty in many fields, and business is by far one of them. You see it in investing as well. There's the assumption that our models are always correct and that things are simple enough for us to understand and thus impact. And really, it's my conception, and I think this has been demonstrated, and I think it's why I'm so interested in some of the stuff that you do, Claire, is as things are growing exponentially, our uncertainty also grows at least exponentially. And so what I've found really is that young people have a very high degree of imposter syndrome, and I myself was like this until, say, six months into to running Hatless. And I kind of realized that this idea, like, yes, we are business folk. We know what we're doing. We have all of this stuff worked out. I don't know whether CogX appreciates swearing, but I'll lean on the cautious side. But yeah, figuring this stuff out. And then basically what I've been doing is I've just been telling students, yeah, everyone's winging it, which some people really don't like me saying, because it's all behind this kind of fourth wall that no one's supposed to peer through. It's like it's behind this veil. But as soon as I peeked behind it, I was like, crap. Because then everything tumbles and the myth it disintegrates. But then what I'm left with is actually quite empowering. It's like, okay, so I actually can catch up very quickly and do things slightly differently and bring these young people with me who've got some brilliant ideas. And so that's what I've been doing for the last kind of 3 years, is really trying to break down that veil and bring people into the fold.
Yeah. Be careful how widely you say that. There's some people's pay that are being threatened by
Yeah.
By calling them out about how vulnerable they are. And do you know what? The world would be a much better place if people actually admitted that they are winging it, they're not sure, they're uncertain, they're human beings. Oh my goodness me. And I was fascinated by the word mythology because, you know, if you draw parallels with, I don't know, philosophy and tales of old and Hercules, I'm sure Hercules, as the mythological strongman, had his doubts before he went into battle. I'm sure he had his own inner challenges along the way, but we don't recognize all of those aspects. We just go, look at how wonderful and sorted he had it.
Well, I actually want to use this as the kind of like the trail-in point for like the actual title of this chat, which is like networked thinking. So what you've just done there is you've taken where I'm heading with like mythology, it's about stories, and you've linked it immediately like it's like, yeah, sure, Hercules had his problems, and it all links together with philosophy. And I actually think this is one of the key things that we're missing. And as I think your point on people feeling threatened is definitely a valid one. So I think thinking about business in terms of stories, thinking about people in terms of stories is really, really potent, because regardless of how big the exponent is in our development, there are some things that remain constant. Like there is this notion of like, when it comes to values, there is a true north. There is like I know that that's where the North Star is. I can head towards that. I can never reach it because that, like, the North Star is not supposed to be attainable. It's just supposed to be a guiding light. And so I always ask people, and we have this kind of thing socially around people not being protagonists. If you have protagonist syndrome, that's a bad thing. That's a sign of narcissism. And as far as I'm concerned, actually, I want every single individual to view themselves as a protagonist in their own story, because then it's like the mythologies that we build around that, the stories that we build around that, those things are so much more easily transmissible and are so much more prone to being networked and linked and integrated in a more thorough manner than any like psychometric evaluation or any kind of current skill set. Skill set will change, current desires will change, but there are some values about us that just don't. And I think it's key in times of uncertainty to really know where that heading is, because everything else is going to be chaotic around you. And that for me is one of the cores of kind of, using narrative, because narratives often, they form the bases of universal models. Like the amount of times that we see I never know how to pronounce it. I had a friend called Theseus, but most philosophers pronounce it Theseus. So like the Theseus's ship problem. So you replace parts on a ship, or I think the other example is like you replace the broom handle and the broom head at different times. Is it still the same broom? And it's like that story has been used across so many different things. We use it when talking about transhumanism, or in just like loads of different places in philosophy. And these narratives are what Taleb would refer to them as they're lindy. They last a long time because they're supposed to. They just work, and so they stick around.
There are, as always, there are so many different angles where our conversation could go, but I'm so pleased that you've called out storytelling in particular, and kind of and how you can use stories to channel complexity so that it's understood and embraced. And so yesterday, coincidentally, this week it's Digital Leaders Week across the UK. And so yesterday I delivered a masterclass on how to combine future shaping with storytelling, and all of the steps and the neuroscience behind it, as well as the business strategy, for example. It goes through to a story, a scenario of the future of teaching, where teaching is wholly AI driven and delivered. And that's very threatening. It's very dark as a story. Yeah. But actually, because it's presented as a story, because it's presented as a vision, people feel they're allowed to play. They're allowed to adjust. They're not direct, they're not as threatened. It feels a safe environment to throw around concepts. And similarly, when you move to story, you shift away from this sense of ego. And at the moment in the UK cinemas, you've got Cruella You know, in all of her glory.
I've only seen the trailer for it, but it's so, I'm already captivated by the idea.
I know. And you know, she's an evil person, but actually she's hugely likable. She's got a backstory, and so sometimes the detachment of ego to a story allows for pros and cons, bits you like, bits you don't like, in a way that we don't often use in our own lives.
Yeah, and I think for me, to use the kind of almost an abstraction of the picture paints 1,000 words, I think stories give us more than 1,000 words, more than 1,000 paintings, because they allow us to interrogate complex scenarios by putting us in a position where we have to empathize with a character, which is not something we do actively most of the time. Though I would make the argument that it's a quality of a good leader. It is someone who can readily empathize with pretty much anyone that they're working with, including their clients and including you know their business partners and employees. And I've lost my trail of thought a little bit there. Yeah, so the that ability to empathize into the story and the creative aspect of it, it puts us in a mindset, I think, of play, of creation discovery, rather than one of rigor and rule following. And I'm not so rebellious to say that there should never be rule following, there should never be procedure and policy. However, I think the best example, well, the best thing to do here would be to tell a story, in fact, to highlight my point. So I've struggled somewhat to explain to my team the role of serendipity and just general, simple, I'll use the word virtues, but I'm not using this as any kind of grandiose sense of the word virtue. And the role of those things, the subtle roles that has in business or in life in general. And in fact, at one point I ended up having an argument with Louis, who's in the call with us, about how actually ethical businesses, people that have these kind of virtues, are actually more prone to doing better in the long run, in the long game, if they stick to these kind of strong virtue points, these strong goals. And so what ended up happening is I ended up writing this little parable. I called it a Hatless parable, because why not? About a particular scenario that had happened, which turned into just like this really lovely moment and a potential business connection, which is I was getting on a train to Bristol from Exeter, and there was this lady on the train, and she was looking out and clearly like waving to, well, I found out afterwards, her mother, who she doesn't get to see very often. Her mother lives in Exeter, she lives up in Leeds. And she was just getting a little bit upset as we were going away. And I just had like a quick little check, like, hey, are you all right? And it was just like a subtle little, she was just like, yeah. And then she took 5 minutes. And then she kickstarted conversation being like, thank you for doing that. Not many people would have. And this isn't me kind of stroking my own ego, as much as I'm prone to doing that sometimes. And this was very much like it was just a tiny act of just authentic compassion that then led to a very long conversation. We ended up finding out that we had a lot in common. She runs a design agency, I run a software agency, so there's some potential collaboration there. And the only reason something hasn't come of it is because COVID's happened, and she's up in Leeds, so it's very difficult to make things happen. But at the time, it was very much here is a little story. Forget training, forget like mandated empathy or communications training. Here is just a little story, 1 page. Read this and really try to engage with the 2 main characters here, and the ideas around it, because it allows for people to look at it and be like, oh, I see. This was just like, imagine if Chris had sat on the 1 chair back. That would never have happened. Imagine like, what were the other potential responses? The careful choosing of words, etc. And so the stories with them, they're so simple to convey. It's almost again, to use another model, it's like compression. Narratives are complexity compression. You can fit so much information into such a tiny package that anyone can interrogate on any level, be it down to the nitty-gritty to the total abstract kind of goal of the story. And that for me is the role of narrative and of play, and that creative element. Yeah.
But it's so true. And when you look at how stories transcend time and geography alone. And so one of the things that I do within my coaching practice is help people to really start to question the stories that they've been taught, or that they've hardwired in over time because of their religion, their community, their family, their schooling, kind of all of those experiences, and undo some of those, because they can have a tremendous limiting impact on life outcomes, as well as life affirming impact. And that's just on an individual. So when you max that out, when it can have such a shift, and it can really shift people's behavior.
And I think the only difficulty with that is that some of these narratives, and again, it's like this networked effect, that single piece of narrative will connect into so many aspects of their being, down to the people they've decided to be friends with, the work they choose. And so when you change a narrative, you can end up with this strong cognitive dissonance, and it can take time. And I actually think, so what a good friend of mine, Max, he would, for a very long time, would always caution me against giving advice. Not me specifically, but I'm very prone to giving advice. And he said, that's actually dangerous. And what we've now come to the agreement of is actually, giving advice is dangerous, because you don't have enough information about their life to understand how it's going to affect them. We also we live in a complicated world. We don't understand half the shit we claim to understand. Damn it, I swore. Damn it, CogX, please don't hate me. Shh. But it's a damn sight better than doing nothing, so long as you take responsibility for the advice you give. And so I think it's really important. Anyone who's doing so therapists understand this, psychiatrists understand it, and I think not enough coaches realize that actually what they're doing can be really deep rooted. And so if you're coaching around limiting beliefs or that kind of thing, actually it's not just hey, here's the limiting belief, it's gone. Because what you're going to leave there is just this void in the middle, and this network around it of other nodes that were connected that now have nothing to latch onto. And so really there's an element of rebuilding and relinking things. And this is another, one of the brilliant things about models and of narrative, is that not only are they more easily memorable, I even made a note to bring this up at some point, so I'm going to bring it in now, that they're more easily memorable because they're more natural to us. They have a chronology to them, and the mind is much better at remembering things that have a chronology. And they also piece together lots of different elements. Our brain is a collection of nodes, parts of the brain that connect in different manners. And when we're just learning by rote, learning facts by rote, with no active element of not necessarily even story, but of linking. So whenever I'm learning something new, it's okay, here's this thing I've learned. How does this fit into the rest? What is this similar to? And creating those additional connections not only means that that thing is actually more likely to be remembered, but in my mind, it's if you imagine all of the things you know, all of the people you know, the ideas you have as this kind of linked up thing, and then this might get a little bit too abstract. I'd love to give a diagram, but I don't have one. But you imagine in some kind of three-dimensional space, all of the things that the more linked two items are, the closer in space they are together. The more perfectly you link all of your entities together, it becomes this perfect sphere that becomes then densely clustered, kind of like neutron stars, that they over time they form and do this. And this is almost a really nice graphical idea of what being a well-rounded person is it is someone who has so thoroughly integrated every new idea that they bring on into what they already know. Because not only are they going to remember it for longer, it's going to be more relatable. They'll have more ways of interpreting it and linking it to everything else that they're thinking. And for me, I think, particularly the education system is just okay, cool, here is this silo, here is this other silo, and you see this in business, and it's I don't know which way round it goes, but I would have to suspect that the fact that we're teaching in this siloed manner is what leads us to silo in business. And we all know that when you silo in business, things get missed. You have lower performance. Sure, it might be more stable, but it's stable at a worse point. And so I really think it's when you start thinking about okay, rather than what are the procedures involved here, It's what are the communication channels? Who should know who should be communicating with different people, at what layers, with what level of complexity. As soon as you start thinking about things like that, like the performance increases, the information loss decreases. Yeah, I don't know if I've done that idea justice, because there's a lot to it.
So let me try on some of that, because you described, you've got multiple layers here. You've got this micro layer that is the one individual and their brain, and then that starts to expand to be a kind of social community, whether that be a business or a football team, or whatever it is,
or a classroom,
yeah. And then I think one of the most exciting things with the proliferation of social media, and also Slack being used by so many different communities globally, and you see these creative collisions and combinations of data going on. If you can find a way of harnessing and making sense of all of that, you can achieve heights of performance that you never have before. And I just want to stick with that micro level first. When you say, wouldn't it be great if you could? And what I dare to suggest, and I know we've got people on the call on here who might go, what are you going on there? But what I dare to suggest is that actually that is going on in your subconscious all of the time, and all of the millions of bits of data that you've got coming in right the way throughout, being connected, being connected together, but you're not always conscious of those combinations. And so you do see some really potentially wacky views that say we should be teaching children intuition, so that they're able to still their mind, to start to access what's going on underneath, to start to consider what that might look like, to trust what's going on in their head brain, their heart brain, and their gut brain all at once, and be familiar with that.
Well, so there's two different elements that I can link in here, one of which is a new idea in my head, which I haven't really thought of before, so I'm going to get that out there before I forget it, which is I find it really entertaining that most of the Western world is like, intuition, let's get rid of that. We have science now. Science is better. Yet on the flip side, we're like, yes, AI, let's go with AI. This works, and it does really well. Like most AIs are built off of neural networks. Why are they called neural networks? They're based on the whole thing inside our head that creates these, I've just seen a question in chat. Yes, Louis, I will definitely do that, because it is a good highlighting point. So on the one hand, intuition bad, AI good, but they're the same thing. It's just one of them is like actually computational. There's this strange sense that because we understand the maths in the AI, it is more reliable as a tool. Like, I'm much more inclined to trust. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't flaws. I'm quite well versed in all of the irrationalities and psychological flaws and ways we miscalculate things. But I'm much more inclined to trust the thing that has had billions of years of evolution go into it, versus something that's been around for 50 years and come up like by some researchers that is imperfect. So that for me is pick one or the other, because we've had so many elements of big data or modern research processing things, coming up with the same things that old wives' tales have been telling us for 1,000 years. And for me, like, you can't have the two in competition. They're the same thing.
But in the human aspect, there's so much that's limited by power, by bias, by judgment, that stops that from coming through. So it is dismissed as an old wives' tale, or that's the witches, that is that kind of intuition stuff, and ignorance. And you see kind of different power struggles between communities, between genders, all with unable to fully embrace diversity and hold space for those thoughts to come through. And that's not to say that AI truly does that, because it's as good as the inputs that go through.
Well, if I could jump on that quickly, because there's something really funny, which is that we've actually got AI models that are based precisely on that kind of, you said about like there's opposition. There's people like arguing in like big ways. There's this whole class of AIs called GANs, generative adversarial networks, which is you get two neural networks and you pit them up against each other and you watch them battle it out, and they learn one's job is to try and con the other is to figure out when it's being conned. And so actually this opposition, even though there's these irrationalities, it's actually over time they optimize, or they tend towards something that is correct, or at least gives the impression of being correct. And we're using that in AI just in the same way as humans have do it socially.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of generalizations in that, and I'm being very overly simplistic, but yeah.
Yeah, and also, and I do think, you know, to see the other side, I you know, I've got a good friend who works for a very large corporate who'd been very involved in AI in healthcare, for example, and he'd get so frustrated that we wouldn't trust AI in terms of decision making, and yet we trust really tired junior doctors on a Saturday night with, you know, so much burden going on around them to make the right decision. So I think this question of ethics and trust is absolutely enormous.
Yeah. And I think up until recently, I was very much on that, oh yeah, well, we should just trust the AI. It knows what it's doing. And in some domains, I'm still very much like, we've got AI that can look at like an X-ray and detect or like identify cancer with higher accuracy than doctors, particularly junior doctors, but that's unsurprising. And yeah, we should definitely be using that. I don't think we should be allowing it to have, obviously it couldn't at this stage, like have free reign. Like this, there needs to be human verification. In fact, one of the people on our team, whose name is Amy, she's just starting her PhD on the verifiability of neural networks, which is a huge open topic of, okay, so can we create a neural network that does its thing and is effectively an intuitionistic black box that we don't understand, and guarantee that its results are correct within certain error bounds? Because currently we don't have that at all. It's a big problem for medical. It's a big problem. It's a very modern idea, a very current issue with self-driving vehicles. And it's a totally open topic, and we have no idea what we're going to do with that.
There's got to be a way, you know, there's a term around augmented intelligence that I feel quite comfortable with. And there's a movement that says, you know, as we shift towards neurodiversity and embracing neurodiversity within the workplace, why don't we just treat AI as a different diverse voice in the team, but within that team environment, so that there isn't supremacy of any voice. We are moving together collectively as a network.
Yeah, that's something I can really get behind. So I've always put myself in the what's called the transhumanist camp, which is effectively, and this is very much a tangent off topic. We can reel it back in a moment if needed. Although I think for CogX, the idea of like, how do we not screw up the next 10 years? I think this is very pertinent. Around, so like, what makes us human? What makes an AI not human? And actually, I'm very much in the camp of like, actually, like, it will come to a point where AI will just be considered our progeny. They will be the next step in human evolution. Much like people have already got biotronics, or they've got like laser eye surgery. Like that's a biological enhancement done by technology. People with pacemakers, it's a biological enhancement. Where is the line? And again, it comes back to that Theseus problem from earlier on. And yeah, I don't know if we're going to be able to reconcile with people, because it's such a huge philosophical difference. In like, the reason doctors don't want to trust AI is because they don't have the human touch, and no one can define that. But there's something about it that rings true with people.
Yeah, and you know, just to take your argument that little step further, you talk about evolution and AI being the progeny of human beings. Well, actually, it really does enhance where we go. And when you look at jobs and professions and careers and how they're enhanced to provide that extra little bit of value that wasn't there, that extra little bit of productivity that wasn't there. And when I've seen AI deployed within the fashion industry, for example, and simulations bringing fabric to life on a walking model based on designs, you know, that cuts through the supply chain and the waste by, you know, phenomenally. And, kind of in the conversations I had with the producers, like, does that mean that designers are at threat? It's like, no, the designers are fully involved and they're squeezing out that extra value. They're really stepping into their craft and pushing it far beyond where it was, just 5 years ago.
The way I see it is that, like, so we have a rule in the company, which some of the team disagree with me on, but I'm quite hard on it, which is we will never work on a project whose intent or probabilistically large outcome is mass unemployment due to automation. The idea being, that's going to create like a next generation of effectively Luddites. And I'm drawing a lot of different elements in here, so I apologize if it gets a little bit out of control. So not only is it going to do that, it's also a massive problem in terms of the impact that has economically, because we're now going to have a generation of people who are going to be put out of work by AI and are going to struggle to get work. There is this idea of the lump of labor fallacy, which is, well, we had massive automation in the Industrial Revolution and people still found jobs and new jobs came about. And that's totally correct. However, we also have to consider exponential growth. Growth rate of IQ and training is not exponential. There's going to hit an intersection point where suddenly training can't keep up. And at that stage, there's going to be a very large swath of people who are unemployed irreparably, and we need to have systems in place for that. So whenever it comes to anything AI that we build, we try and see it as, what we're going to do instead is we're going to create a colleague for you that has a set of skills digitally, usually in number crunching or, pulling together of data. We never want it to be, we're coding your replacement. And I think viewing it as this much more partnership between human and computer, I think sets a good groundway for when we have general intelligent robots that are conscious, if such a thing is possible, we don't know. It really sets so like I always treat my, I don't want to say her name, my Google Home, but made by Amazon. I don't want to say the name in case it sets her off. I always treat her with respect. I say, thank you for the notification of whatever, because, and that might seem really silly at this stage, but I think a lot can be told about a person from how they treat the things that will, even if they're inanimate, I think you probably see where I'm going with that. I'll leave that in there.
I think kind of demonstrations of humanity define you as a person. So from a business perspective, for example, if ever I've been involved in a serious disciplinary or a serious dispute and somebody's left, you still treat that person with dignity and respect and kindness, because it's not just about that person, it's about you and the behaviors that you're role modeling, and also how the broader team would see you. So, kind of you need to own that place of leadership, whether it's you actually being a leader within a team or you being a leader with the virtual team that you have with your assistant who shall not be named. Yeah.
Oh, you can name her, I just can't.
So I think it's absolutely fascinating. We set a very loose title today around network-based thinking, and in my head we'd be looking at how we can combine different skill sets, different mindsets, different geographies, just colliding these together in the way of been mucking about with Clubhouse and Twitter and Instagram all together in one. And instead what we've done is that we've gone to a much more profound place where the network is defined as a human and AI interface, and the combination, the dance between the two, fully embracing those as a team, what that could do to advance humanity is exciting.
And I think what this is demonstrated, so part of the title that was omitted because the title would have been way too long, was like the fractal nature of all of this. And I think actually what we've come down to here is, yes, there's the scope to go broad in the networks, but then the next layer down is self-similar and more detail and connected. And the next layer down is more detail and connected. And now what we've ended up doing is linking up, I suppose, ironically, the original concepts at the high level down to the bottom level. And we've brought those two nodes closer together. So yeah, I think that's a nice full circle element.
So I'm going to bring through, we did have a comment in the chat that I want to bring through, which is the Rome,
Rome research.
research.
Yeah, so when it comes to network-based thinking, there are a couple of tools that can be used to assist with that. And what I'll do, I said I didn't have to present anything. However, the fact that someone has requested it kind of makes me feel obligated to.
Hang on then. Let me make you a co-host. Yeah.
So I'm going to move this over here. Now, when it comes to, that is not loaded in the way I expected it to. Let's get that over there. Okay, so when it comes to network-based thinking, it's important to think about like different ideas as these are like dots in a map. And you draw a line between them if you have some method by which of connecting them. So the fruit, the banana, links up to Pikachu, the Pokemon, by virtue of the fact that they're both yellow. Terrible example, but it's the first one that came to mind.
They both have banana, Pikachu. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. 3 syllables. There you go. That's a link. Not a particularly useful link, but it's a link nonetheless. But for example, Claire and Louis in the chat, you will now forever be linked within my internal knowledge graph by basis of you were in this call together and we were discussing interesting AI things as a group. And one way of visualizing that is through a knowledge graph. And these things take a long time to build up, but this is what one might look like. I can't zoom in too far because there may be some data in here that I don't want everyone to see, but hopefully you can see what this looks like. And it's this chaotic conglomeration of lines and nodes going everywhere. And you can zoom into different levels and see different elements and how they link together. And this particular node here is linked to a million different things, but some other nodes are a bit more sparse. And this is actually a graph that I've been building over the last year. This for me functions as a CRM as well as a Zettelkasten, which is just a way of like storing learned knowledge. And if this is what 1 year looks like, with like, this isn't even complete capture. This is just the key things that I think I definitely have to remember, rather than some of the other tacit knowledge I've picked up, some of the other models I've talked about, or conversations I've had with people that aren't in here. If this is what 1 year looks like, what does one lifetime look like if you amalgamate an entire team's worth of information, an entire company's worth of information? Yeah,
indeed.
And
and when you see those networks, oh my goodness, I was in the 1990s then. So you might not know this, but I was an intelligence analyst. It's one of my first jobs out of university. And so we would map together and we kind of really look at data and harness data around criminal networks and who knew who and who was selling what and who was advertising what. And not, a bit more graceful than throw it out the wall, but actually kind of expanding out the data so that you can see the links, that you can then put the interventions in place. And all of this is going on beneath the surface all of the time. It's how you bring it, how you make it explicit and act.
And I would even argue that for some people, it's not happening at a subconscious level, because I think most subconscious things are still things that have to be trained or practiced. And I think one of the big flaws in my mind, and this is something I'm writing a lot about actually for the company strategy, because a lot of what we do is around improving the way we're teaching students about software or about marketing, and focusing on interdisciplinary and mixing ideas together and piecing things together. And one of the big flaws, I think, is that schools do not teach that kind of, how does this link? How do these elements link together? And so this is one of the big things I'm always pushing for, is how do we teach people about software practices and marketing practices through this interconnected web, through stories, through practiced interconnection.
Yeah. We have gone double over the time, which is part of the joy of being the host, is that it's our booth here on Neon Juno, so again, although we will quite soon be hitting up to the next speaker. So I'll ask if there are any last thoughts that you wanted to bring, or any words of encouragement for any of the viewers around, how can you develop that network-based approach? I think what we've done over the last 40 minutes, believe it or not, 45 minutes, is we've expanded on the merits, the opportunities, the benefits, the risks, the ethics of combining. But I think as a whole, we've established an argument that network-based approaches are the way to expand opportunities, and in expanding opportunities and visibility, you can make sense of the exponential change that's going on all around us. So that established, what tips, what words of advice could you give to anybody around developing that mindset, that approach?
Man, I wasn't prepared for that question. I'd say part of it's a habit thing, part of it's a curiosity thing, and part of it is a kind of a confidence and trust thing. You need to trust that your intuition is going to spot some patterns, and then you actually need to pay attention to them and think like, oh, okay, so why did my subconscious pick that up? The subconscious can understand far more in-depth information than your conscious mind can, but your conscious mind is the one that can actually rationalize and put into words. So listen to the subconscious, be skeptical and interrogating, but also trusting to an extent, and really just kind of let the creative, like, forget, is this a stupid idea? Am I wasting my time? Maybe, probably yes, but sometimes you'll find that little golden nugget that makes the whole process worthwhile. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in interconnected ideas that we haven't picked apart yet. And yeah, so have fun looking for that.
Yeah, stay curious, have fun. And just trust, if it doesn't make sense now, it probably will at some point.
Yeah, completely.
So Chris, I'm going to wind up the recording right now. Thank you so much for taking us on that rampant journey through time and space. And for all of the viewers, there'll be a lot more information about Chris and his business, Hatless Studios, within the description below. And thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording, but take care.